Hello and welcome to Hysteria. I'm Erin Ryan.
And I'm Alyssa Mastromonaco.
Alyssa, with everything going on in the U.S. and around the world, how has Jada Pinkett Smith managed to insert herself into this news cycle? How?
Erin, I can't escape the woman. She is everywhere. She is literally, she's in my inbox. She's on my Instagram. She is everywhere.
It's like everything. It's like everything. There's so much bigger news stories that she is like, yep, I deserve to be mentioned alongside these. I too am viral.
It is amazing when you look at like the People magazine feed, right? It's like crisis in the Middle East, Jada Pinkett Smith. I mean, it's like it is utterly, it's chaos. Jada and Tupac. Jada and Tupac. Jada and Will. Jada and Chris Rock.
Jada, please, if you're listening, you should teach a college class on publicity. Because
breaking through, because she has.
Whatever you're doing, it is breaking through, and I truly do not get it, but I must offer reluctant admiration for this. And welcome back. You're listening to Hysteria, the podcast for people who aren't afraid to say that the last decade has raised the question, are men cut out to be Speaker of the House? I don't know. The only good one has not been a man. Our guest today needs no intro. She's a Hysteria favorite, and she's back to do our news segment with us. What a treat. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, welcome to Hysteria.
Thank you so much.
We are so excited to have you. We're going to do a little bit of a lightning round of news today. So as of Wednesday morning, the House of Representatives still doesn't have a speaker. That's because GOP nominee for Speaker Jim Jordan does not have the votes. Not only does he not have the votes, he was even further away from having the votes in the second round of voting than he was in the first. Jordan is, to put it in political science terms, a damn nightmare. We'll put something out that goes into more details about the way he's a damn nightmare soon. But for now, let's focus on the fact that the former All-American wrestler is getting body slammed repeatedly by his own party. In recent years, Jordan has embarked on an extraordinary rise in Congress from a right-wing rebel on the fringe of his party who was described as a legislative terrorist by former Republican Speaker John Boehner to being on the cusp of speakership, aka second in line to the presidency if he were to win. Yikes. His ascent is the clearest indicator yet of how far House Republicans have moved to the right and shows the strength of Trump's grip on the party. But shockingly, this is a fact we learned yesterday, Senator, and we are just in shock. Despite Jim Jordan's practically 16 years in Congress, he has never had a bill signed into law, much less passed in the House. His record is thin, even by the standards of the modern House. Not a very effective legislature. So, Senator, what do you make of the anarchy in the GOP right now?
Well, do we swear on this show?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes,
ma'am.
It's a shit show. It's terrible. It's a disaster. And they can't seem to get it together. I think that both Jim Jordan and Scalise were far too conservative anyway. And so the moderates didn't want to vote for them because, I mean, Jim Jordan doesn't want to support Ukraine funding, even though he said he would, maybe. And Scalise just doesn't have a record of bringing people together at all. So neither was a good choice. I hope that they'll give the authority to McHenry to actually be a acting speaker while they hash out leadership elections in the future, because then at least we can move key bills like getting Ukrainian funding, getting Israel funding, and getting funding for whatever type of immigration reform we could do on a bipartisan basis. Those seem to be the most exigent issues. We also have a massive childcare cliff where like hundreds of thousands of childcare centers are going to go out of business this month or next month. And a lot of working parents will have nowhere to bring their children for that good early childhood education and good quality daycare when parents need to be working. So there's a lot of things we should be voting on right now that are quite urgent, and them not having a speaker is really very problematic.
Mm-hmm. There was a quote from Politico Playbook this morning that I thought was pretty interesting and kind of tied into the fact that Jim Jordan has been in Congress for almost 16 years and hasn't had a bill signed into law. The quote from Playbook is, as the GOP has drifted steadily right, their ranks have steadily thinned, and their crucial role in making Congress work has become increasingly threatened. Being called a moderate these days isn't really an ideological name. It's about keeping your head down, building the relationships, and making the compromises that have kept American democracy on track for 247 years. So, Senator, do you think moderate, when we say moderate, that it now means Republicans who actually try to do their jobs?
Yeah. Common sense, moderate. Like, it's just someone who believes they have a responsibility to govern. I think a lot of members of the House get elected to be just so extreme and to destroy things and to just knock it down. And it's obviously something very detrimental to the U.S. government and to the fact that we need to help people and support legislation that makes a difference. And so those electorates are very focused on just destroying anything because they're unhappy and they want to express that disapproval in some meaningful way, and they want their member of Congress to shut it down.
And do you ever kind of talk to Republican colleagues in the Senate and have them kind of grumble to you about what's going on in the House?
Not really. Senators are very preoccupied on their own world and their own things. So they're always working on a bipartisan basis to get meaningful things moved forward in the hopes that we could get the House to vote on it. But people are pretty serious and they really believe that they have a role to play. So I'm working with Republicans at all times on something meaningful. I mean, I'm working with Josh Hawley on banning stock trading. I'm working with Cynthia Lummis on cryptocurrency and blockchain. I'm working with Joni Ernst on letters with regard to Israel and getting the hostages back. So it's a constant effort to address things that are serious and meaningful and try to get votes on them.
Speaking of things that are meaningful, let's talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. Senator, you've been working hard this year, trying to get the Equal Rights Amendment adopted as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution. But first, just to catch everybody up, the first version of the ERA was introduced in Congress in 1923 when it was meant to protect the working conditions around women in the workforce. In the 1960s, it made a comeback and was reintroduced in 1971, was approved by Congress, and in 1972, the ERA was approved by the Senate. Then it went to the states for ratification. Congress set a ratification deadline of 1979. KG? Take it from there. What has become of the ERA between 1979 and today?
So this is so interesting, and I am excited to talk about this. So the Constitution requires two things to make an amendment. It requires 2/3 majority in the House and Senate and 2/3 ratification by 2/3 of the states. Both of those two things have happened. The last state that ratified was in 2020. It was Virginia. And as you mentioned, we passed it in the House and Senate in the 70s. Now, people who say, well, that's not it. You know, there was this clause in the bill that passed in the House and Senate about timing. And the clause was in the preamble. And if you're a lawyer in lots of states around the country, preambles are not relevant or dispositive. Neither is legislative history. It's what's in the actual text of the law. And so we believe that if right now the archivist of the United States, if she would sign the amendment and publish it, it would be the 28th Amendment, period. That's all that's left to be done. Now, there's a debate about, well, under the Trump administration, the Office of Legal Counsel said that the preamble was relevant and it mattered. Well, we have taken Office of Legal Counsel memos from previous administration and reviewed them and said whether they are valid or invalid in the past. In fact, during the Obama administration, he took some OLC memos written by the Bush administration about torture and invalidated them, overruled them. And so we could ask this Office of Legal Counsel to say whatever they want, whether they think it can be published and signed now, and whether that's relevant, whether the preamble makes a difference or not, or the archivist can just do it because she is not beholden to any OLC memo. She can do it all by herself. And so we're trying to get President Biden to just direct his archivist to sign and publish.
So, okay. If the archivist signs and publishes, what would the ERA do? Who would it protect? How would we see its impact in our daily lives?
So the ERA, as written, protects everyone from bias and inequality. So it's an equal rights amendment for women, LGBTQ, race, gender, gender identity. And so it's a very well-rounded, complete equal rights amendment. And so as applied to women right now, lower courts have already found that these anti-abortion changes to the law that eliminate a right to privacy in the mails, in traveling, to getting medical care, from getting prescriptions in the mail for mifepristone. Courts have already ruled that that is against an equal rights amendment of that state. So it's saying equal rights amendments guarantees that you're treated equally under the law, and that means bodily autonomy. It means a right to privacy with communications with your mother or your doctor, or right to the mails, right to travel. All those things would be, in my opinion, and in the opinion of some courts already, that it would be protected under an equal rights amendment. So it's a way to very firmly overturn Dobbs.
So if KG, all of these court cases that are making their way up to SCOTUS right now, specifically all these groups that are going through the Fifth Circuit in Texas, all trying to find their way to Judge Kaczmarek so that they can challenge abortion. Those cases, I'm not a lawyer, you are. Would those be moot? Those could no longer go forward because they'd have no
we'd
standing,
have amended the Constitution.
Right?
Now, you could file a lawsuit arguing that this is an invalid constitutional amendment, and it would go up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would render a decision arguably next October. Well, imagine if they rendered an opinion that said this is invalid. Who would turn out to vote? Everybody. So it would be a GOTV explosion.
Bonanza.
It would be all the things. And so we'd have a lot more people voting, and people would be furious because this is a legitimate legal argument. And any argument against has been disputed by precedent. So they can say things like, well, a bunch of states want to get rid of their ratification. That's been tried in the past. It was tried with the 14th Amendment. It was tried with the 19th Amendment, and you cannot unratify once you've ratified. So some will say, well, it's taken too long. It's been decades. Well, the 27th Amendment was written 203 years ago. And that just passed because some smart college kid realized it only needed one more state to ratify, and they got it done, and it became the 27th Amendment. So we will win in a lot of these legal arguments. And if the Supreme Court is so politicized that it would rule that these arguments aren't valid, well, the country would respond accordingly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of countries responding accordingly to right-wing judicial activism, while you're here, I want to get your opinion on some international news. So this past weekend, Poland had an election, and the far-right anti-democratic nationalist party that had been in power for 8 years suffered a surprising upset. The party, which is pronounced peace, but is spelled like piss with one S, made many anti-democratic, totalitarian adjacent moves while in power. One of the most famous being a draconian abortion ban. So voter turnout in this election was huge. I think 73% of voters turned out. More women turned out than men to vote and unseat this party. Do you think that this kind of rhymes with what might happen in the U.S. as well?
I do. I think people are furious that their fundamental rights to bodily autonomy, to make life and death decisions about medical procedures, to decide when and how many children people are having, I think they've had it. And you've seen this change in government in very Catholic countries and very conservative countries. You've seen reproductive rights secured in places like Ireland and in Spain. And so I'm not surprised that Poland has decided that their right-wing government did not represent their values and voted in record numbers. I think if this Supreme Court tried to take away a passed and certified and published ERA, this country would respond similarly, because people fundamentally believe in equality, and they believe that these rights to privacy and these rights to bodily autonomy and basic civil rights should be protected.
Yeah, what happened in Poland was super interesting. And it is also interesting to see that a restriction on bodily autonomy and increased gender discrimination and attempts to clamp down on women's rights is something that tends to go along with totalitarianism everywhere. And I think you're right, Senator. I don't think that voters here, I mean, they've been mad for a while. We've been mad since 2016, 2018, 2020, and 2022. You saw the results of that. So, I mean, I guess, but if there's anything the American GOP can't learn, it's its lesson. So,
Yeah, and it doesn't. Well, interestingly, in my state in New York, we are also going to have an equal rights amendment on the ballot this year. And we believe that'll drive voter turnout, that it's going to be a reason for people who stayed home last election, for example, to actually come out to vote this time. And we will run a very grassroots oriented campaign. We're actually doing a coordinated campaign in New York this cycle. And that ballot initiative will really inform get out the vote strategies. So I'm really excited about it. And, God forbid we have a Republican president like Trump again, and God forbid they do a national federal ban. We would need an equal rights amendment in our state to protect that right. And so it's important that we push all states, purple and red and blue, just to start doing ERA votes, because we've won all of them so far. Red places like Kansas and Montana, like we are winning when people put reproductive freedom on the ballot.
How can our listeners support your efforts at the national level to ratify and get the ERA in the Constitution?
So really be heard on it. Use social media, use their voices. If they are based in New York voting, there's a not-for-profit that's been set up to do the organizing for the ERA, but they should get involved in organizing, because when every state does it, it builds on the next state.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, thank you so much for joining us. The ERA work you're doing is really exciting in a sort of like Montgomery Burns, like tenting my fingers, excellent sort of a way. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And we look forward to hearing more good news about this soon.
Thank you. It's my privilege, and I'm very inspired by it. So it's exciting me, and it's going to get me to work that much harder in the next election cycle to make sure everybody votes.